Hello everyone, my name is Uthris, and welcome to some Space Engineers. I am kind of picking up a bit of an older series. It has been, I don't know how long it's been since this has popped up on the channel in terms of a video, I guess over a year at this point. We're back in Space Engineers, and I'm actually looking at the last two vehicles that we made on our build series. So we got the light scout ship here. And we also have the mining vessel. Now, you guys will notice the light scout ship, I had to take off the small wheels. Originally, the design of this thing was to be more of a runway vehicle. So it had wheels, and you would just kind of come down on them and land on those and come to a rolling stop rather than less of a VTOL kind of style. I had to go away from that design here in testing for this episode because I just wanted to fly this thing around. It took us a little while to build, and it was fun to fly, and it just seems like this thing, the wheels don't work. They don't work anymore. I tried changing the wheel settings a little bit. That did fix it, but as soon as I copied in another variant of it, it immediately broke again. So I'm pretty sure just going with landing gear is just going to be a safer option because those little tiny wheels, they just didn't have, I don't think, enough clearance for a vehicle. Over here, this is the miner that we made on the second episode of this series. And this is a full utility vessel. Small pipes to carry the ore to the cargo storage in the back. You could, in theory, swap out some of the back components and put on a larger reactor if you want to, and just move the ore detectors around. It's using landing gear, very much just like the other one. A lot of the thing that's with this design, and same thing with the light scout ship, is just that you are able to kind of get into its undercarriage without having to lift the thing up. I think that's super important for small grid vessels like this, right? You can either just let them hover, of course, and repair them that way, but it's so cool to actually have them landed on a pad and then come over to it and just see someone actually working on the vessel while it's grounded, right? Because you don't want to be around these thrusters when they're just hovering there. Anyways, the goal of this episode, right? A little bit of a preface to what we want to do, and we have a little bit of a design language going from these two ships, and I want to hop into it with building a little bit of a light utility vehicle, specifically for welding and grinding, because we have a little bit of a miner here. And so we're going to use this as a big reference point to make another ship. So you guys will probably notice that, at least that's what I'll be going for. We'll be changing it up a little bit and changing up the armor plating. I'm not just gonna swap out the equipment and call it a day, right? I'm gonna scratch build something just use this one as a very close reference for the new vessel. So we'll hop right into it, and I hope you guys are excited to see the third ship of our small fleet, and we'll go from there. Okay. And here we are in the build portion of the video today. We are going to start, of course, with the cockpit. For me, laying out where exactly you're going to be sitting in any sort of vehicles generally is the key placement on my building strategy when I go ahead, right? And then from there, I go straight into internals. I know this thing, it's going to be carrying a lot of supplies to do some welding and grinding of resources. And I'm pretty sure there's also certain components that can't fit through a small conveyor belt. So you can see that I actually have a large connector and a medium cargo container there so that we can hopefully feed everything we need through this inventory system, because otherwise it's just going to sit in the tools. It's going to front heavy our vehicle, and also at the same time it means we can probably carry less stuff. So just things you got to kind of consider ahead of time. You can see initially I thought, well, maybe what if I put the arms, the welder and the grinder above the ship? Would that be cool looking? No, not really. It didn't look like it was going to be. So I went ahead and shifted it to the bottom of the vehicle because it comes out not quite as far down as I thought it might have near the beginning there. And what that does is allows me to keep the profile of the vehicle relatively thin, right? Unlike some things, I do like to have a little bit more of a streamlined look to a lot of my vehicles. Even if this is a utility vehicle, it's supposed to be pretty boxy, but having a streamlined look is super important. Even with these engine bays that you're seeing here on either side, how it has kind of a reverse thrust, a downward thrust, and a back facing your main thrust, they're all being kind of one singular piece almost, kind of following the line of the ship. I find to keep it pretty streamlined to do something like that. And then that allows you to kind of use the rest of your creative power more on the detailing of the armor, how you want to build that skeleton around. And you can see that we're doing a lot of resources kind of going along the spine of the arms a bit to kind of bulk those up in terms of tying that back into the structure. Also, we are going to then wrap some of these internals as well. I use a lot of sloped pieces for this and also half blocks. I find that to be a good combination. You know, each person kind of has their own look. I definitely like to have more of the internals visible than hidden away, especially with these utility ships and these light small ships, because you know, I just find it odd to have a vehicle that you don't want to see the insides. How's it working? Is it easier to repair? You know, is this a combat ship? Well, no. If it's not a combat ship, then why do I need so much armor? Is the armor more or less just like a cage surrounding your thrusters, so you don't just bump into things and instantly pop a thruster off? You know, so those are the things that I'm thinking about when I'm designing this. Also, while it is supposed to be kind of a heavy industrial ship, you know, it keeps the footprint relatively light. You get options of being able to see through some of these armor pieces and still see the sky. You can still see the internals. You know, balancing all that is pretty hard to do. It just kind of takes practice, right? I kind of have a good method when it comes to engines. Generally, I'll have kind of a spine following the north, south, east, west kind of direction and kind of encase it there. And you can even see that on our mining vessels a lot, right? Where I kind of encase just the around it, but I don't fully cover up the engines because I think the engines need to have its own breathing space. Landing gear is super important, right? I like always to have just a block worth of the landing gear being exposed from the lowest point of the ship. That way you keep landing gear to be relatively streamlined, right? Because our ship here is far more lower on the front than the backside. And if I were to have these big bulky landing gear coming out of it, it might start making the thing look a little weird because the landing gear is going to require all these massive supports coming down on the backside that will make it look like they have like legs, you know, like long spindly legs just for landing gear. And it doesn't really make sense for this kind of craft, in my opinion. The top armor is almost, for me, the hardest thing to lay out. I tend to get into the minutia of just wanting to add plates on probably too many locations, so we kind of rework this multiple times as we go through. Painting tends to be a pretty early process for me. You know, I'll get the rough shape, and I know generally all my vehicles are going to be two-toned because it's kind of the easiest way to keep your colors coherent. And it's going to start with kind of these yellow industrial colors on it, and then a gray kind of undertone to kind of make those either pop out or to make the rest of the vehicle look maybe a little bit more grungy than it might otherwise feel. At this stage, you know, I'm thinking I'm covering up the thrusters a little too much, so I'll go ahead and cut that back just a little bit. Anywhere where I see like a nice hard 90-degree angle, at least for my style, I like to kind of round that out. I like to make it two angles rather than a 90, so like 245s, 260s, You know, something to give it a little bit more variety than a box. And these are just things that you try to pick up when you're going about building pretty much anything in any game, whether that's going to be Minecraft, whether that's going to be StarMade, Vorion, Medieval Engineers. You're always in search of what might make sense stylistically that you enjoy, right? Here we're adding some batteries to it, some additional batteries, because we're kind of having a little bit of a power issue at this point. It's always good to test your vehicle, test it pretty early so that you can kind of work out the kinks before you commit too hard on either design or before you commit too hard on the color scheme, right? Because every time you make modifications, you're going to have to repaint the thing. So the power is pretty high in terms of its usage. We have a lot of large thrusters. While I was flying around, I realized that I got rid of the side thrusters. So I realized that I need to put this thing on the ground before I start drifting sideways forever and add a few side thrusters. It doesn't need too many side thrusters. This thing's not really going to be jetting around at max speed all the time. So we really only need a few of them just to prevent that drift from happening a little too much, right? We will cover them up, add a little bit more of a shell so that they look a little bit more secured and part of the body itself. And we'll just put them into the little winglets there so that they feel part of the vehicle, right? That's kind of the hardest thing, in my opinion, with Space Engineers, is trying to decide a good way to make some of these components feel like a part of the vehicle. Because while a lot of their things like the thrusters, the landing gear, they look great by themselves, but in my opinion, they have a very niche look to them that doesn't lend itself well to the blocking nature of the game, right? So like the thrusters, them being perfectly cylinders, there's only a few spots you can kind of put armor on them to make them fit in. You know, things like that. But that's kind of true with any building game. You just have to kind of, again, discover what you like with each of your builds. At this point, it's kind of the final detailing. We can go ahead and turn down the lights of the planet a little bit, put on some other sub-interior lights and some large kind of exterior lighting, just in case you're doing work at night. And then you're pretty much good to go. These are very small utilitarian builds. So let's go check this out in the game and see how well this might perform. Okay, and here they are. All three of our current vehicles are parked here on some small pads. Just to give you guys a little bit of sense of scale to them, we have the new welding and grinding ship. Now you can pop these off, the grind and the weld, and you can actually make, I have a couple variants back here. You can just pop double weld on here. You can also just do a double grinding variant, right? It's very easy to just swap those components out. It's essentially a one grind and replace sort of function. I would expect that you probably just have one of each variant because they're a little bit more efficient. Having two different types, just a little less efficient. It doesn't really seem like it's worthwhile unless you're in more of a tight situation, maybe just starting out and you need that welder power or you need that grinding power. We use the industrial cockpit. I love the looks of this cockpit. It definitely gives it a completely different feel to the mining ship, even though they are still very similar to each other, right? A lot of the same design language, right? I'm using kind of side struts to support a little winglet design on here. These are atmosphere vehicles. Back here to the landing gear, which kind of crab walk their way out in a way to give kind of access point to this connector node. We got some battery. We got plenty of thrusters when it comes to atmosphere. Basically two large thrusters facing kind kind of forward, backwards, and down to provide the bulk of the power of this machine, and a few side thrusters just to help with that drift. We have nothing facing up because these ships aren't meant to be flown upside down. And plus you can kind of save some room by just, letting the pilot navigate it, hopefully within the safety parameters as described. Up top, we got just a thin layer of plating, a little bit of a radar dish, just to make sure you can maintain comms with your kind of station. We got a few floodlights on here for visibility's sake, because you never know. It could be dark outside. If we hop into the cockpit, of course, with the industrial complex, you kind of get a good visibility of all the internal displays, and it looks very nice. Very clear access and visibility to your two tools right there. Let's just go ahead and take off. As you can see, it does take some power to go, right? We generally can kind of cruise, at speed and kind of maintain about 70% power. But the moment you kind of kick in higher maneuvers, you're gonna drain the power, right? Because this thing it's a utility vessel. It's not really meant to be doing any major aerobatics or anything like that. So I'm fine with it being a little bit of a power hog, and yeah, it performs pretty well. It's a little drifty. I do like having a little bit of a drifty, weighty vehicle in this game. It definitely makes it feel like I'm actually flying a little bit of a spaceship, more so, or an actual weighty, believable object rather than something that just performs on a dime, right? We also have some blinking lights, right? Just some caution, because it's a utility vessel, and that's also why we do this kind of color scheme. If I come out here, you can see we have a bit of a light scout ship, one of the older variants here, and you can just see that it just kind of welds things up pretty quick, right? It's a pretty standard welding attachment, so if you guys used these in the past, you know roughly how nice they are to have, right? And this is, normal grind speed. I don't even think I have the grind speed turned up to any sort of insane level. So, if you want to mass produce some ships or repair some ships, this should be a decent choice for your small fleet, as you can see there. With welders, you can kind of prevent wheels from spawning. That can happen. So you just have to get into the vessel and kind of spawn them in. The grinder works as well. If I go to item number 2 here, and we can just grind this away, right? Having 2 grinders, in my opinion, it's definitely optimal, because only having 1 arm here does make this a little bit of a tight fit to kind of squeeze in to get a lot of these details, and chunks will just start kind of falling off as you get through a lot of these support material. So, it would be cool to see a little bit of a fleet of these working together to kind of chop off a bigger kind of scrap job, or a more kind of synchronized salvaging operations. I might end up building some sort of tug as well, because look, see, right? This thing fell over. Okay, it's essentially really not in good position. So I think I might make a tug variant. That's probably just a small ship. It's not going to make it into its own episode. I think that would be a little bit of a waste, right? But I do want to make a tug so that you can maneuver vessels, and for your little weld or your grinding teams. But yeah, I think it performs pretty well. It's relatively peppy, and it works. Definitely works. Oop. Alright, so we'll just hop out of that. Anyways, I think that's gonna do us for this episode of Space Engineers. Happy to be back. Future builds are gonna be about this size, I think, initially, right? I want to get a little bit of a fleet of small vehicles going. In fact, that's where this landing pad design is going to come in handy. This is going to be a very standardized size for my fleet that I want to design. It's going to use the same landing pad length and width for everything, and the same location for the connector on all of them. And really the only thing that should govern the shape of the ship is depending on the connector, right? So our mining vessel, the connector appears to be pretty centralized onto here. You guys probably noticed that the weld and grind ship is on the back side, so this thing sits a little bit more forward on the landing pad. And then the one on the scout ship, it sits a little bit forward as well. So the connector does. It sits a little bit more back on the pad. And so those are going to be design constraints, I think, for all of our small kind of single-seater utility ships, or maybe some light armistice ships, light combat, who knows. But this is kind of the plan going forward. So I'll get a fleet of these size ships, and then we'll bump up to a different size landing pad and do more of a medium size ship before upgrading to a large grid ship. Okay, I think that's a good path going forward for us to come up with a full fleet design. And that'll do it. That'll do it for this episode. Thank you so much for coming out and supporting the channel. Feel free to subscribe for more creative goodness such as this. Hit that like button. Really appreciate all the love. Go ahead and look in the description. I'll be adding these to the workshop over time, so I'll have to update links at some point. But these will get uploaded, and they're all vanilla. So there you go. Anyways, I'll see you guys in the next video.